full circle for me is about interiority and exteriority. How we think as individuals and how we relate to the outside world. And so, it's also about this process, which is a journey, that the journey, even though the circle has no beginning and ending, but it's a continuous movement, between the different places where Andrew has been, his thought processes, and how the work really is not a linear progression. And so when you walk through the show, there isn't really a trajectory in terms of, okay, he started here in the 70s, he ended there in the 2000s. No, the work is all interrelated. And if you look at it, it's really hard to say that, oh yeah, these were the early works and these are the later works. I think there's this definite continuum in terms of his strategies, in terms of the formality of the work, and in terms of the spirit of the work. And so I think, on that note, I think I want to sort of bring Andrew into the conversation, and let's take this journey together and see where we'll end up.
I say thank you, Tumelo. I'd like to thank Lou Lupert, who's not here. I was sitting in Kingston in the park drinking coffee, minding my own business, and observing people. And for 6 months, I observed Lou walking up and down his morning exercise, and he used to see me every day drinking coffee. And one day we said hi. He asked me what I did. I said, I'm working on a building that I bought from Ben Bigfall, but I dabble in art. And we became friends. And a year later, I was in the show that Carl Hazelwood put together downtown, and my name was mentioned in the Wall Street Journal. And he said, I thought you said you dabble in art. I said, well, I like to say that because then I don't have to explain myself. Art for me is not a career, it's a life. I grew up in a very poor home, but my mom always said to look at a glass of half full instead of half empty. I always had food on the table. I never went hungry, but pocket money was a problem. My mom was a single mom. My dad was one of those dads that didn't want any responsibility, so he had one kid there somewhere, a bunch of kids all over the place. I knew him, and just like how I observed people, as time go by and I got into art, I made a deal with him that he is responsible for buying me my oil paints and all the art materials I need. I fall into art because I was one of those kids that loved to dismantle things. And I think one day I was trying to dismantle the radio to see the man in the radio. My mom said, okay, that's it. Go and kneel in the corner. And I happened to have a pencil in my pocket. I think it was about 6. And I started drawing on the wall. And after that, I'd have her sit as my mother. I would do sketches of her and all my neighbors. I made kites. I fixed bikes. I always had something going to make pocket money. I get up early in the morning at 5 o'clock, which I still do. I exist in 5 hours sleep. I've always existed in 5 hours sleep. And I go down to the wharf where the guys will come in from fishing all night, and I will help them bring in the catch, and I will get free fish or shrimp. So I always had deals. I've learned how to make deals. So art for me was never about making something to sell or to put on someone's wall. because they really want an art market there. Art was something for me because I had a problem with speech. I stuttered and I shy, and I got beaten up many times until I learned how to fight. And you could be minding your own business, but somehow walk in the wrong place and you end up in a lot of trouble. So I got in a lot of trouble, but art saved me. Like every time something happened, I was home drawing. But I could find bad, or bad company find me. My principal at school, school was my worst nightmare. My mind was somewhere else. I wasn't learning anything there. I didn't even want to be there. But she said, Andrew, there's a national competition. Since you love to draw, apply in this national competition. So at 13, I painted this big painting and walked it to the National Museum where the national competition was being held. For the competition was all grown men. I was a kid. Mr. Burroughs happened to be on the panel, saw the work. I didn't get accepted in competition, but he sent a note to my school asking me to come and see him. Guyana, there's two classes, there's rich and poor. And he taught at a very high-end all-boys school in Queens College. So after my regular school, I went up to see him. And he said, there's some talent there. I would like you to come and work with me every day after school. And he said, I could see something there. We would talk about art history, we talk about different movements, but I don't want you to spend any time writing about it. I feel there's a special talent there that you could succeed as an artist, and I wanted to do it, and by 19 to leave Guyana. So I would take the bus to Queens College to arts class after my regular school, and then at times I walk back home at night or so he gave me his bicycle so I could go and ride him backward and forward. I told my art principal, art missus, that I was going to drop out of school, so she said, that's the best thing, just go and do. That's what you have to do. Burroughs' training was he was very hard, and once he saw that I was passionate about it, then things became easy. I always wanted to paint, and he said, you have to learn the basics, drawing, painting. So for 6 months, I remember he had me drawing. Every day I had to draw a circle freehand. And I hated it. And then he would send me out to observe the marketplace. Then I had to go back and compose a painting, a watercolor painting of a market scene. Then he would tear it apart and said, these women don't look like if they're in the market, they look like if they're in a church. Go back again and look at how people stand. So that was where my training of looking and observing and knowing. My eyesight was very good, so I could look down the street and I know if something going on there to either cross the street, or if I want to get involved in it, I keep going. So I learned about art history. I have a very large library in my place because I've looked at everything, but my whole interest is not to make a painting to hang in someone's house. I'm interested in breaking new grounds. I'm not interested in what's hot, what's popular. I hope one day, when I'm long gone, some kid would see it and say, he did it, I'm going to do it better than him. During these paintings in Montreal, Phaedra. I lived in Montreal, and I was working on this series of painting. I was hanging out with Phaedra's mom, and Phaedra was 8 and her brother was 9. So Phaedra was seeing this series done in Montreal. So I'm always, and this was the beginning of pushing the boundaries. But even though I was in Canada, I was always looking back at what I saw in Guyana as a kid, and looking at art history and trying to tweak. I'm always trying to tweak it and think outside the box. Like I know about the Russian constructivists, I know every movement, I've learned about it, but then I have to move on and do my own thing. I'm not trying to be popular. In fact, I would prefer not to be at my openings. I would like to put the work out and just lie low. But once again, thanks to the Dorsky, thanks to Daniel, Sarah, Tumelo, because when he sent me an email, I got it one morning about 2 in the morning. I looked at it. I sent him these images, and he chose that. I said, "Oh no, I really don't want to do that." But I didn't tell him. I figured, Andrew, just let it be, and it's the best thing that ever. I had my doubts about it, but it worked. And I'm glad that Phaedra is here, because I knew her when she was a little kid, and she's here. She's seen these done. And basically, the techniques of these, I was throwing ball bearings on the surface, pieces of cloth. I did a drawing, I taped it with liquid mask, and then I threw things on the surface and sprayed. I started with a light color, then a darker, and then peel it. So it's just bouncing backward and forwards. And the reason I can't call myself a painter. I'm not a painter. I'm not a sculptor. I'm an artist where I'm just building things or drawing. And even when I do the freehand drawing, it's free, but there's a structural element. And there's no pre-sketching. You just let it be. So if there's any questions you need to ask, I'll be happy to.
Okay, maybe.
There's one thing I must say. In Guyana, there's 6 races: Blacks, East Indian, Chinese, Portuguese, Europeans, and the Native Indians. I was very lucky to grow up in that country because I never had to deal with race. I got to Canada, and I found out very quickly that I was a black man. One night I was walking, got arrested, thrown in jail, ended up in the lineup. I was in jail for 8 hours. I had to keep my cool. My dad was a cop, so I knew, an undercover cop, so I know how cops think. So I had to keep my cool. Then I started to make art in such a way and name my pieces that stayed away from race, sexual preferences. My heroes are women, some could be men. If the work is good, that's what's important. And my pieces, I try to keep race out of it and just look for a wider range. Because if you get into a box, your mind can only shut down. So I try to keep moving backward and forward. Thank you.
There's something that seems to be a consistent, consistent tendency in terms of thinking about each piece that you make. For instance, we're standing in the middle of the room and we have this piece called Flight Kite, I think it is.
Yes.
But what is kind of interesting is that a kite is something that always, you view from above. It flies in the sky, and you're viewing it from above. And here we're in a situation where the kite is actually laying low, flat, slightly elevated, you know. So the question I have is these ideas, even though the inspiration comes from the kite building experience, but there's this sort of very interesting subversion that takes place in terms of thinking about the subject, but as well as the formality in terms of approaching the material. So we're looking downwards rather than upwards on the kite. You know, the ropes are not there. They seem to create this very sort of net on the ceiling, which I think for me what was most interesting was that it echoes when you look at all the other works in terms of all the line drawing. So they become lines of demarcation, but they also become lines that actually occupy space in terms of becoming a new labyrinth that sort of covers part of the ceiling. So there's always this dialogue between, you know, looking at or working on a two-dimensional surface and then pushing it into a much more three-dimensional. I think there's always this tension that you have in your work. Maybe you can speak a little bit more about how you think about two-dimensionality and three-dimension. There's this sense that you always want to push the work to kind of move outside of its own skin.
Well, these pieces are the beginning of moving away from using actual paints and start doing structure. But the reason I made these pieces and hung them on the floor at the time, just looking at art history, Jackson Pollock made all his paintings on the floor and then he hung it on the wall. Larry Poons was pouring on the floor during the color field in the 70s and then he hung it on the wall. Sam Gilliam took painting off the stretcher and draped it from the ceiling. I painted these on the floor on a prop, and I decided, well, since I made them on the floor, maybe I should slightly have them touching the floor and extend the lines out of the drawing into actual space. And when I thought about that, the kites came into, my days of kite flying came into play. I made kites, I sew kites, I would put kites up in the, according to the wind, if there's a windy day, I would put a kite up in the air and leave it up in the air all night. And the kite had a loop, a loop on it with a tongue, and that tongue would make noise, it would sing. So to get these kites back home, I had to navigate using a stick and throwing it over these live electric lines. And once I got back to my house, I would tie it off to the porch. The kite would be maybe 15 blocks away, or maybe further. So people would follow the string to see which house it was tied off on. And it was a number of people doing it, not just me, but a number of my friends did that. So it was just one way of bugging neighbors. But that's where once I started thinking of extending my drawings into actual space, I started to think of my days of kite flying. So I'm just weaving life into making art. And like I think it's important to learn the fundamentals of art, and then at some point you have to stop being an artist in order to make art. And I mean, if I was concerned about the latest trend or concerned about what's hot in the market, then I wouldn't be making art. I have to find something that I could use. So I took I took painting, dismantled painting, and started using the ingredients of painting, which is line, plane, volume, mass, and I figured I could. That would give me a lot of room to dance around, and I'm still exploring. I go backward and forward, so that's what that's about.
So, for instance, if we talk about this piece, in Flight,
Yeah.
There's also this very interesting idea of seriality that sort of appears in your work, that you work, it's very rare that you see one piece that's unique in terms of its own self, but you know, there's always this repetition that is involved in the process of your work. So here in Flight, we have, you know, these very sort of kind of odd shape pieces of wood. You know, again, the question of materiality is a very important element, I know, in your work. So could you maybe elaborate a little bit about how, you know, in this instance of In Flight, you know, there is this, the bending of the wood, there's the shadows, there's the line, not only the line on the wood, but the actual physical line that's draped. And there's also an engineering that occurs in terms of how you present these works. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit about that?
Well, I'm always concerned about storage, and I think making art is about storage. And you are your biggest fan, so you have to figure out a way to make these pieces and a way to protect them. So it started with the bamboo piece that came out after the paintings, and that piece, or the reason I would always keep that piece and never sell it, because I'm always using the things I thought about and experiment. I'm using it. So I make something that could be break down and flatten out. And these works here, it's a flat piece of bending plywood from Italy. And the plywood, I gesso it about 8 times and sand it, and I give it a sort of flex. And I could draw, and I use the tensile structure approach, where the tension working off of a block of wood. In construction, I've done a lot of work in construction, and at times we make blocks to rig things or to set up. So I took the idea from my rigging experience in construction and simplified a block. And basically it's a block on the wall. And the veil structure and the curtain structure came about when I moved into Kingston. My works were in storage, and I told myself that I'm not going to build anything unless someone give me money to build it. I've done all the building. I have enough work built. I don't have to build anything anymore. And now I'm Tumelo to my studio, and I show them the works on paper. In 2013, and they said, and they asked me how I was planning to exhibit these works. I said, well, these pieces are made to be behind glass. And they said, you sure you want to put those behind glass? So they left. And I went into my notebook from 1980, because I keep notebooks. I work on ideas, and I just put it aside, and one day I may build them, maybe I may not. So they left, and I went back to an old concept of an easel painting series I was going to do that I never done. And I took that concept and I thought about a clothespin, and I took the clothespin and added the clothespin. So those sheets of vellum and paper are just hanging there by tension. But because Daniel and Tumelo asked that, I came up with a whole new series of work. I won't plan it today.
So in the spirit of, thinking about, you mentioned something about storage, that the idea of, making also implies you thinking about, how do you actually preserve these works. I just want to go back a little bit about, before even in the making, there's also the question of space, where you make these works. So during the moment when you were having no studio, you trained yourself to use the computer.
Yeah.
Can you maybe elaborate on the air rights? Those are the works all the way back on the wall, which I think are the only works in this exhibition that I would say have a much more include photography.
In 2004, I got the Barney Newman grant with no strings or questions attached for $150,000. So I used that to buy 3 shipping containers to pack up everything I had in Banker Street and send it to Vermont. And my plan was to stay out of the state of New York, maybe stay in Europe, but somehow I'm back here. So during floating, and I was fashionable homeless, I was camping out on Susan's Crow floor, Robert's Bland apartment on his sofa. I had like 5 sets of different keys, including keys for someone's truck. And I don't drive. I didn't even have a driver's license, but I had keys to that person's truck. So I bought the CAD program and literally sat down and taught myself CAD because I had to do something. My comment on real estate was to do the Air Right series. And basically, it's a way to create sculpture or a structure without having to build it. So I have a series of work, and I'm still planning to work on more. And on Thursday, this great architect that I really admire died, and she's the only one I know who, Zaha Hadid, who I admire, who have used CAD the way that most architects have been able to use it. And she used the curves, and the reason she's able to use the curves because she grew up in from Iraq, and the writing. So that's where that curve came from. In my CAD forms, I think the freehand drawing that goes to the Timeri and the Nazca lines have a lot to do with the forms that I'm playing with, and this is just a tip of the iceberg. And the reason I say that, and I number I try not to give my works 1 to 3, and the reason I don't give them 1 to 3, then as people know how much work I have, so I give them numbers, a series of numbers, so you can't tell how many pieces I'm doing. And my friend D. Antonio, and as a Castelli told me once, he said, Andrew, Bob make a lot of work, and he put too much out. Jasper make less work, and he don't put any too much out. He said the thing, you have to control the market. Even if it's not selling, you have to control the market. So I make the work, I store it, I protect it, and how this show came about, it was just by chance. And because I had the work, Lou was able to get Sarah and Daniel on board, and it's nice. And I've gotten a chance to work with Tumelo because I've known of what he'd done, but I was too busy fighting in court. And then I went to Europe. I said, well, maybe one of these days it may happen, and it did.
we'll open it up for a few questions. If people have questions for Andrew or myself, we'd be happy to respond. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the significance of the metal drums that form?
Oh, in Guyana, I hang out on the docks after school because my uncle was a seaman, and when he was in port, I was able to hang out, and he was out of port. I knew who to talk to get on the dock, so I was able to hang out on the dock. And Guyana, the ships came from Trinidad with cooking oil, and it came in 55-gallon drums. And I've always been fascinated by the drum because I think it is a perfect, as far as an object, it's a perfect, as a proportion. And I thought doing a drawing on the drum would also be a comment on the found object. I wanted to make a comment on the found object, to take the found object and transform it. And that's why I call those my industrial pottery, because I took something that's universal, as people use them for cooking, they use it for making music instruments, or take them apart and make roofs in Guyana for shanties and shacks. So I thought I should do a series. Most of the work in steel was done between 1994 and 2004, or 10 years. I was working in construction and had my space was 8,000 square feet, so I was able to set up works. This is the first time that this body of work is being shown. It was never shown because I just had the kind of space to set up my own gallery, and just people who I invited in got a chance to see that.
How many of those works did you actually make?
And the rusting process came about. I saw the hulls of ships on the docks with tons of rust. But what made me realize I could rust canvas and paper, my mom, when she did her sheets and she hung them on the lines in the backyard, the clotheslines was wire, so the sheets would rust, and they had a technique that you take a lemon and you take a needle and you rub the needle in the lemon, and then if you put it on that spot, the rust would transfer from the sheet to the needle. So I started thinking, oh, maybe I could rust paper. And the canvas, the reason that series, the paint instructor series, the 9 in that series is canvas dip in matte varnish, because the matte varnish also had a lot to do with people washing clothes at home, and then they made this starch, and they dip it in starch, and then they leave it in the grass to dry, and it got so stiff that you could literally or stand it up. So once I started using acrylic varnish, I had a special breathing system, and I would dip these canvas pieces in varnish, and then I would stretch it out on the board, and once it dry, I pulled it up. So that's how the show at the Nassau County Museum, that series, was done. The piece at the Silver Seaman property, the same thing. And this piece is all using common, everyday techniques.
I think we have time for one more question. And yes.
And in Peru, the line drawings. I met a an artist, an archaeologist from London when I was in my teens, and he invited me back to his library and allowed me to copy every line drawing that he had from way in the interior in Guyana, because it's hard to get there. Now, maybe it's easy to get there now, but in those days, unless you had money and a plane, it's hard to get there. So I copied those drawings in 1967, and in 68, once I was moving away from painting figures, and I wanted to work with line. And the reason I was moving away from painting figures because the kind of paintings I made had to do with the suffering in Guyana. So it weren't the kind of paintings that's one would hang on the wall, because it weren't something that you would hang in your house, because it dealt with human suffering. And I did a few of those, and then I figured I had to get out of that, because if I didn't get out of that, I get trapped. So I moved to the line drawings, and it's very spontaneous. I don't pre-sketch, and once I make a line, I look at the paper, and then that line determines whether I go left or right. But you have to be willing to take that, to be willing to mess something up. But somehow, there's pieces that flow and pieces that take some time. But my process of working, I work in stages. In painting surfaces, I'm painting surfaces. I paint maybe 100 surfaces. And then I do paper, I do vellum, I do plywood. The plywood, these surfaces was done in 2003, after I came back from Rome. I was looking at the tops of architecture in Rome, and those surfaces was painted. Then I have over 100 surfaces I paint, and then I had to close up my loft. So like all those things are sitting in Vermont. So now that I'm on park, I just take out surfaces and draw. So you break it up in such a way that your head is in the painting, so you're thinking of all the possibilities. And then if I'm thinking about structure, I'm doing structure. And then the line drawing I do in between cooking, in between talking on the phone. And my friends really get annoyed when I'm talking to them and they hear the pencil sharp and go, "Oh no, you're drawing." But you have to just allow it to happen. And I look at these forms, I can't believe I've come up with that. And it's nice to have that surprise, because you look at it and say, I wonder what was going on in my head at that time. But you just,
Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, everyone.